Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about feature slice design. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what do you think about feature slice design? So I had to look into this a little bit because I hadn't heard the term before, but the basics of feature slice design, as far as I understood it, is that it's a layering architecture for, in this case, front-end, where you have these bottom layers such as shared code, which is shared across multiple areas. You have models for like certain or entities in like domain things like users, products, customers, etc., etc. And then you have like widgets, which is like visual components that do something with some type of API, and you sort of build on top of each layer until you get to like pages and so forth and so forth. And for me, that's sort of like I design most of my systems exactly like that. It's I'm so old at this point that for me this is just a layered architecture. That's my understanding of a basic layered architecture, and that's the essence of MVC. MVC is a layered architecture. Layered architecture is a concept in basically it's the default for practically every server, every API that you build, things like that. You have usually a data layer, business logic layer, network layer, you can call it whatever you want. It's a UI presentation layer, so forth and so forth. So to me, it's sort of natural to think in these terms. The thing that I usually say when I talk about this is that I design my abstractions from the inside out, which is a little bit different from, because I can understand that they go a little bit deeper into like very specific rules and so forth for this, because and I understand that if you're going to teach this to someone, I don't think you can truly teach somebody this at a level where they can master it without a lot of practice, because it fundamentally comes down to what I argue is one of the hardest things in software development, and that is to get a good feel for the right level of abstraction. That's a very tricky thing. And it takes a lot of practice to do this. So let me explain sort of how I think about it when I work with my software code. So usually if we just stay in UI land, because this is a UI specific thing, the way that I try to explain to people is that if you're creating a UI component, the way that you want to design it is so that it doesn't actually know who's going to consume it, and then you create an interface that makes sense for that component. So an example would be if you create a button, instead of basically just putting that button into a page directly, create a separate package for it, or like a folder, which is just a button, and then you create an interface for the properties that you're going to use on that button, and if it's in React land, for example. And so the button might just, you do the styling, you do all these sorts of things, but then you provide properties such as the ability to override your styles, or the ability to pass in an on-click function, or the ability to set the text on the button. The button from the inside, if you just look at that file, you don't really know which page this button is on. It could be in any page. That's a well-designed bottom layer, base layer for your UI. And then the next layer, you might want to create a very specific button. Maybe you want to create a button that does something with an API. Let's say you click it and then it sends an email or something like that. Well, then instead of remaking, like you're updating your base layer, you take that base button, put that in another wrapper, another layer, and that's called send email button. And in that specific that component, you put in the text send email, you put in maybe some custom styles if you need to. Otherwise, that's the difference between reuse standardized components versus non-standardized. But at the very least, you do the things that make sense for that specific button case, and then you might add an API that actually gets a fetch call or something like that fires if you click that button. And that's the layering that I'm talking about. And then that layer can also have an interface where okay, send an email, but maybe you want to send an email with a specific network request. Maybe you want to send a specific subject or something custom with the with the email itself? Well, then you do the same thing again. You create an interface for your new send email button, and maybe that takes in a subject and some body text or whatever it might be that you need in order to send that request to the server, and you basically keep on building layers like that. The way that I usually tell people how to practice this is to basically do the thing that I just suggested. You think about it in a sort of, if you worked with reusable component libraries or component libraries such as Material UI or similar sorts of things, that's a very good example where their components or Bootstrap or whatever, like these are generic open source project usually that could work on any website. And that makes it very, the people who learn how to do this, they can create components that are truly reusable, and they usually get a really good sense for creating good abstraction levels. And you sort of have to understand other developers to do this really, really well. But it is a good way of practicing it. And then when you have those base components, you use those same base components to create a higher level thing, like a date picker, or my favorite one is, say, Google Maps, which is basically a widget that you can embed on any website that has some generic showing off, showing locations or showing a map or something like that. And then when you've created that component, then you create another one which might be called something like, I don't know, local stores in your area for this specific company, where this component is just a wrapper around the Google Maps thing, for example, that configures that underlying component so that it might show just the stores for a specific company in a certain region, or how to get to somewhere, or so forth and so forth. So it's basically each layer has value in of itself. So if you just want, say, the UI components, you can just use the UI components. If you want something a little bit more advanced, like you just want the map thing, you can get the map thing. But if you want to like add something on top, you have to provide that yourself. And of course, you can do the same thing if you design it well at the top level. Maybe you are working for that specific company and you really just want the component that shows all the stores on your website. Cool. Then just use that abstraction. So each layer builds lays the foundation for the next layer, and the next layer just uses the underlying thing to stand. It's how most things work, I will argue. And the trick to doing this right is, as I said, to create good interfaces, to create the right level of abstraction. And I argue the easiest way to do that is from the inside out. So what I want you to take away from this is that I apply most of the principles in feature slice design. For me, as I said, it's just a layered architecture, when it's the way that everything works. I mean, if you think about it, we start out with, say, a natural resource such as wood, and some people need just to get some wood for their fires or so forth. But then you have carpenters who will pay some loggers to go and get that raw wood so that they can refine those logs into something like planks. And then you have builders or contractors who will pay the carpenters or whoever does it, right, to get those planks so that they can make houses and so forth. It's just, as I said, like each layer just adds something to the next. And that's how you build up higher and higher levels of value and complexity to any product, basically. And it's the same thing for you when you work as a software developer. The bottom layer is just something that doesn't, like, it can be used for most things. It's fairly generic in UI land. It's basically a component that doesn't really know which page it's on and takes in some properties, does something, and then you can wrap that in a more domain-specific component that knows how to do something more specific. This is the thing that gets complicated, because the more specific you make something, the more convenient it gets for whoever needs it for that specific use case. But you're also always running the risk that you will create something that is not the right thing. As I've said before, guys, if you want water and you have a stream nearby, that's very convenient for you. If you want some soda, it's really nice to have a soda shop or a factory or something like that where they make soda, so you can just go and get it. But what's really bad is if that soda company blocks off the river, so they take all the water, and now you can't do anything else than go and buy soda, even when you just need water. That's the trick to doing this really well, to create that separation of concerns, clear interfaces, and allowing people to decide which level of the stack of this layering architecture do I need, because each of them, they just add value to the higher up you go, but you can always go all the way back to the foundation of things and get the raw materials if you need them. Have a great day.